Hello, everyone, and welcome to Co-Creation Station, the podcast where we talk about the law of attraction, the art of allowing, spiritual magic, the mind-body-spirit connection, and how to best enjoy this mystical, miraculous, mysterious, crazy, sometimes confounding, but always incredible journey we call life. My name is Collin. I'm located in beautiful, sunny North Hollywood, California.
My name is Stephanie Orlina. I am a transformational life coach and I help people shift away from negative thinking. And I am in San Diego, California.
And thank you so much for listening or watching to this week's episode. Each week we start our discussion from a different jumping off point. And this week I came across one of my many things that I do in my life is I do oracle card and tarot card readings for people. And I came across this particular oracle card and in a reading I was doing, and I thought it would be a good basis for our discussion here this morning. So this is from the To Give Credit Where Credit Is Due. This is from Rebecca Campbell's Work Your Light tarot deck. Sorry, there's the cover of the little booklet there, Work Your Light by Rebecca Campbell. And this card is called Answer the Call.
It's pretty.
And it's got a picture of, for those of you on the audio, it's got a picture of a lady looking at a beautiful vista of like crystal mountains and sunrise and waterfall and everything. But here's what it says. Here's what the reading for this card says in the book that comes with the deck here. Your guidance is divinely guided. You are being called to answer the call of your soul. It might be scary, it might not make sense, but if you trust your soul's yearnings, you will have a life beyond what your mind could possibly imagine. Answering your soul's calling is not a one-time thing, rather it is a lifelong dance. Deep down, you already know what you long for, what your soul yearns for. Whatever you are called to do, that is your calling. Don't overthink it. Don't wait for permission. Just say yes to it. Most people are waiting for a step-by-step plan before they take the first step. But intuition does not work that way. It takes faith and courage to answer the call of your soul, and that's why most people don't do it. But you are not most people. You are in exactly the right place to answer your calling right now. You don't need to know the whole plan. You don't even need to know where it will lead. You just need to take the next step. No one has ever had the complete perfect plan for anything. There is no there is no end destination. There is no right or wrong way to do it. And you do not need permission from anyone else to do it. Sometimes the more resistance we have around answering a soul calling, the more important it is to our soul's growth.
Wow. Oh, that was great.
Yeah, it was kind of mind blowing. That's why I wanted to talk
Oh,
about it.
and I had just this, like when you read the title, I was like, meh, meh, meh. I was like, I'm not
Yeah,
really in this. Oh, I know some calling, blah, blah, blah. And then you started reading. I was like so many
yeah.
different things popped out at me. One of them was I heard something the other day and it was like, you're on your way from San Diego to New York. And when you're on that trip, you're constantly, you're on your way to New York, you're on your way to New York, you're not there yet.
Hmm.
And it's like, it's like, you want to know every turn you're going to make. You don't go on that journey for that when you're doing that, but you just go and you have a good time anyways. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a great analogy because we don't do that with trips. We just know
Hmm.
like, oh, well, no, at this point, you just trust that you'll know when you need to turn left or right or get the X, whatever you need to do. And that card was so beautifully written. It was like, just, yeah, just do it. And then, you don't have to know the plan. You don't have to know the end result. Just like do it. And that intuition doesn't work that way. Like I'll
Yeah.
know when I'm supposed to know.
There's a number of things in there. For the short amount of text it is, I'm kind of blown away by how many like earth shattering things she packed into that. Because that what you just talked about is one of the main things for me. But there's also a couple others are um, you don't need to come up with the plan, and you don't need permission from anyone else. And I
Uh,
was actually thinking this week, like as someone who does oracle card readings and medium readings, like there's kind of this thing like after you do them for a while where with most people it's like, especially if I am charging a client, like if somebody comes in and they've agreed to pay a certain amount, and it's like, and I say, okay, well, what do you want information about, or what do you want to talk about? And they say something like, I want to know if I should break up with my boyfriend. And part of me is always like, I'm going to offer you a discount all the way down to $5 for a 30-second session, which is, yes, you should. All right, well done. You can go. Because so often, like, we have this really strong, whatever you want to call it, calling, knowing, nudge, gut feeling, something from our true self, our inner self, our intuition that says, you need to get the F out of this relationship, or you need to get the F out of this crappy apartment, or you need to get out of this job, or it could be, you need to go to Hawaii. You love Hawaii. You haven't been in 4 years. You need to go to Hawaii. And like, what we will do is we'll call a friend or family member and say, do you think I should go to Hawaii? Do you think I should break up with my boyfriend? And it's like, we're looking for something outside of ourselves, which, by the way, is perfectly okay.
Yeah.
It's one of the ways a lot of us get to alignment with ourselves is we bounce it off somebody else, because there is this weird phenomenon sometimes where, and it doesn't have to be a coach or an oracle card reader or whatever, but it can be, or a therapist. But it's like, sometimes it's easier for the other person to say, you clearly want to do this, you're clearly unhappy in this relationship. So yes, if you want my blessing, go ahead.
Yeah.
But it's always funny to me nowadays. I've had times where I'm going to call you and ask you, like, do you think I should whatever? And I will catch myself and go, I actually don't have to call Stephanie, because I'm just calling Stephanie to have her tell me to do the thing that I want to do. So I'll just go do it. And then Stephanie can go on with her day without having to. But I mean, I think there's a difference between needing someone's perspective and needing permission. I think a lot of people feel like, well, I would love to go to Hawaii, but I can't because that would upset a family member, or that would, I'm not allowed to because I'll fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And we feel like we don't. It's just this weird thing where we're given the gift of being this free, wild spirit in a human body that can do pretty much anything. And then we go, oh, well, I can't because of somebody else, or some rule or something. And it's
those limiting beliefs, those
Yeah.
limiting thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fill in the blank. Yeah.
Like, so many people, I think, have a dream of moving, especially like when they're like high school or college age, at least in the United States, late teen years, early 20s, and they want to move somewhere far away, or they want to go to college far away, and they feel like they can't because of their family. I've just heard that over and over again from people that are that age going through that, of like, well, I really want to do this, but I can't because my family's here. And it's like, once you turn 18, you don't need, despite common beliefs, you don't need your mom's permission to go to college in Florida or Texas or Colorado, whatever you want to do, But it's interesting because I feel like I've led far from the perfect life. I want to say I've definitely made my share of mistakes and had my share of mishaps, and even parts of my life where I feel like, looking back, I have not acted in alignment with who I really am, and done some stuff I'm not proud of. But I think one thing I can look back and say is that, for the most part, like when I felt a calling to go do something career-wise, or moving-wise, or travel-wise, or whatever, I just went ahead and did it. And a lot of times I'm just talking about my life in like this fairly, what for me is normal terms. And somebody who's listening to my story for the first time will say like, wow, that's so inspiring that you just like wanted to go to New York City and you just went, and I'm like, yeah, it's legal, like you,
Well, I think it's fear, because, I'm someone who I have always lived here.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever had a desire to live anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I've had lots of desires to visit other places. But again, it's, coming back to family, like my family's here. Like there's something, I think it's that whole Libra thing. There's something about stability. And I think
anyone that lives in Hawaii or San Diego, I think, is just exempt from this, because those are like perfect places to live. Like,
And so even recently I was thinking like, do I go live somewhere else? I
Mm.
remember sitting down with a couple of mentors recently and they're like, so are you going to stay in San Diego? And I'm like, it was just like what a question to ask me. Of course I am.
Yeah.
Yet recently I was like, do I go somewhere else?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, that's not going to, that may solve like the housing situation, but then there's like the weather and like your family and
Well,
friends aren't there. And like,
the other
I'm like,
that
that's not the solution.
that brings up an interesting like subtopic of this, which is it's interesting because like I hear a lot, living in Los Angeles, I hear people complain about the rent and like how expensive things are, how crowded it is, how much traffic there is, et cetera, et cetera. Like all the downside, our wildfires are like,
Yeah, yeah.
all the stuff we have to deal with. But the interesting thing is like when I think about LA, I don't think about my mind doesn't jump to the problems. My mind jumps to why I'm here, which is
Mm,
that there's a massive spiritual community here. There's a massive creative community here. Like basically the industry of Los Angeles is creativity.
yeah.
And that just fits. I mean, here
Your
I'm a
soul.
spiritual guy
Yeah.
making a
Yeah.
podcast. I mean, like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
This is where I want to be. But it is interesting that sometimes I will hear people and like they will complain about not only like, oh, the rent is high, whatever. It's like, oh, I can't find any work I like here. The traffic is always terrible. I'm always getting into accidents, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, sometimes that's not you focusing on the negative, although it may be, but it's also like you're in the wrong place. Like you moved to
Mm,
LA because somebody else told you to move to LA
yeah.
and you don't want to be here. And it's almost like your soul is talking to the universe and being like,
Yeah.
create please create some contrast experiences so I'll get the fuck out of here, and then but then people don't listen to it. It's just sort of like,
Yeah.
oh, like I hate it here. This place is
Yeah.
terrible, high rent,
Yeah.
traffic, and
Yeah.
blah blah blah. And it's like,
Yeah.
and you're here because,
Yeah.
well, whatever. And it's like, yeah, that doesn't feel like your soul feels like you should be
Mm,
here.
yeah, yeah,
And because trust me, if you're where, I've lived in places temporarily where I was like, oh, this is not a long term fit. Like I need to
yeah,
go somewhere else.
yeah,
And having lived in New York City and loved it there for 8 years, and then having lived in LA and loved it the whole time here for 9,
yeah.
um, it's like your life is easier if you're in the place where your soul is in harmony, where you sort of
Yeah,
need to be.
yeah,
And if you're
yeah.
in a place where it doesn't feel right to your soul, you're gonna have trouble like with everything.
That's, and I guess
Much,
that's a different thing, right?
It
Because
is, yeah, but
it's not even that it doesn't feel right for my soul. It's like a done, like that's not even an issue. It's just
yeah,
certain circumstances presently,
right.
which can change at the drop of a hat. So it's not that at all. Like even just the thought, I was just like,
Yeah,
no. But I mean, I couldn't just leave out, the idea. I was like, what? And I was like, yeah, no, I'd be fucking miserable.
yeah.
Like, dude, no,
Like
that
you
is
want to go
not
to
the
Comic
answer.
Con and then be able to sleep in your own bed. There's nowhere else you can do that. There's just nowhere else.
And I've
Like you want
always
to be
said
able
to
to come
people,
home from Comic Con, take off the Wonder Woman costume, and
yeah,
just like sleep in your
and
own bed.
and I've always said like I said I'll always have a home in San Diego. Like I
Yeah,
love going away. It's just like one of the best things. I love going on holiday,
yeah,
and I love that I get to come home to San Diego. Like I'll always have a place here. So it's
yeah,
like, like I've thought, oh yeah, I'd love to have like a vacation home in Lake Tahoe. I think Tahoe's gorgeous.
yeah,
But I would just, rent, whatever holiday place I went to. But that's the only place, Lake Tahoe, where I've thought of like I would have a vacation home there and like, have friends
yeah.
and family over but yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, the other thing in this reading that jumped out at me is not overthinking it. She's like, don't
Mm.
overthink it, because I
What is
I
that?
feel like that's
Paralysis
something
analysis,
I can
analysis
definitely relate
paralysis.
to. Is like when I feel something that's in my vortex, I really want to be, do, or have, but then my brain will be like, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. It's like, and I'm like, well, wait, maybe I can figure out a way that I can do it. And okay, let's take all of the potential problems that my brain's coming up with, and let's see if I can like figure it out, like write out a map of how I could
I
get.
know.
And like, it's like you don't have to do that. Like
It's a
that's
lot of
what's
work. Like I just hearing you
so
say
much
that, I was
work.
like exhausted. Like
Yeah, right. And I think that's the thing is like, and everybody has that's the interesting thing about this work is like if you ask people enough, it's like, well, haven't you ever had an experience where you didn't exactly know how you were going to do something or how it would end, but you just started something and you loved it, and all these great things happened? And most people be like, oh yeah, I can remember one thing like that. I'm like, well, that's how all life ideally works. Like that wasn't
right?
that doesn't have to just be one thing you did 10 years
Yeah.
ago. It's like your
Yeah.
whole life can be like that. The key is allowing it. And I love how you brought up fear, because I feel like that's what happens when we really, sometimes when we are used to trying to control things or trying to figure things out our way, with our logical minds, focusing only on like the secular world that we can see, feel, and touch. Like a lot of times that will not get us there. And yet, if we just open up to, okay, universe, you come up with how it happens,
Yeah.
it works. But letting go of that control or that illusion of control, it brings up a lot of fear for people. Like even if the trying to
What do you
control it doesn't
what's
work.
the fear? The fear I'm not going to get it, the fear that it's not going to look the way I want it to look like. What do you think the fear?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I do feel like most of these things, when you drill all the way down to what it really is, it's like this simple thing. And I think it's just, I mean, for me, it's danger. Like if I really let the universe run things, I'll be in danger. Like I'll end up broke. I'll
Really?
end up, yeah,
Oh, interesting.
yeah. And
Wow.
that's drilling all the way down through multiple layers of baloney that my brain would kind of like try to
Yeah.
explain it. But I
Uh-huh.
think when I get all the way down to it, it's like, well, if I just let the universe run it, yeah, what if I end up somewhere bad? What if something bad happens to me or something like that?
That's
Which,
interesting. Like that one doesn't even come to mind. I
interesting. So
think it's I
what is
think
it
it
for
would
you?
be more of like, I'm not going to get what I want.
Yeah, but which would be painful, right?
Yeah, it would be disappointing.
Yeah. So I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's it. Kind of goes. It's the same. Bad outcomes. We're afraid of bad outcomes, right? Yeah.
Well, and it goes back to that whole, the mind. It's so interesting because it's like I have this belief or this pattern of thinking that if I don't know how, then how can it happen?
Yeah.
And that's such a bullshit because I have like a million, no, a million, 100 different things that have happened that I didn't know how it was going to happen, and it still happened. And yet I
Yeah.
still think that I have to know how in order for it to happen. And that is such a
Yeah.
freaking joke. Like it's such a
You know,
lie.
the thing about it is, obviously our brains don't help us in that sense, because the brain wants to determine how, like, and that's a protective thing that our
Well, and
brains
it
do.
wants to figure out, like it's a problem solver. That's what our
Right.
brains are. Our minds
Right.
are problem solvers. And
Yeah.
so that's why this is work, because we're having to work against our minds. That's the problem solver. And the
Absolutely.
universe is just the opposite of that. Like I love when I hear there are already 100 different ways that could happen.
Yeah.
I'm like 100? I can think of two.
Yeah.
What?
But the other thing that doesn't do us any favors is how we talk to each other about it.
Oi,
Because
yeah.
like I've heard so many like celebrity, very successful like actors, comedians, writers, and they will tell a story in an interview or as part of their stand-up routine or whatever about like, when they told their parents like, I want to become a stand-up comedian or something, and their parents' first question is, well, how are you going to plan that out so that you are
Yeah,
financially secure?
yeah,
And it's sort of
yeah,
like, like if you read biographies of like famous musicians, famous actors, famous writers, famous comedians, it's like good luck, like good luck. Like
yeah,
the Steve Martin biography, he talks about how he gave himself this 5-year limit in LA.
yeah.
If he didn't become hugely successful in 5 years, he was going to move, and he
Mm.
literally had his car packed and was like ready to leave his apartment, and the phone rang, and it
Right.
was his
Yeah.
agent with a
I just
movie
got
deal or whatever.
chills. Yeah.
It's like you can't plan it out, man. Like you
Well, and I
can't.
was thinking of, speaking of Wonder Woman, I was thinking of the newest Wonder Woman and how she was saying she was ready to throw it in. Like
Oh, Gal
nothing had
Gadot, yeah,
happened. Yeah. And she's
yeah,
just like, I'm not supposed to do this work. She was
yeah,
ready to like quit acting. And then she got the Wonder Woman job. And
yeah.
it just like put her on the map. Like it's, and it's
The
so
funny thing is, I
amazing.
don't think the funny thing is when you boil it down, I don't think anything really works the way that that control, that desire for control acts. But I guess you can point to certain things, like there are certain careers, for example, that statistically are more consistent financially than others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if you're an actor, your money, the amount of money you make as an actor, literally goes all over the place from like zero to like whatever the A-list people are making, like
Yeah.
10,
Mm,
$20 million per film or
right.
whatever.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to be a school teacher in America, at least, you know that your salary is going to be a minimum of something like 18,000, which is still not a lot, but that's the minimum, and then the ceiling is somewhere around 150,000, and you know, and there's usually quite a demand for teachers or whatever. So there's some level of predictability to that. However, if you listen to any teacher's individual story, you almost always get like, well, how did you end up at this school? Oh, you know what? That was a total weird thing where like I didn't even think I wanted to be at that school. And yet one of my friends that I had gone to school with and I hadn't seen him 20 years, they were the principal at that school. And then they said, oh, we have an opening. Do you want it? And I said, yeah, sure. And it was like this weird thing. And I'm like, see, even, traditional conventional careers have these like moments where the universe takes over and takes you to
Mm,
this place,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
even
But
even people in the most traditional lives think they're running it and they're really not.
yeah. And too, like even with is it Gilda? What's her name?
Gilda
The
Radner.
actress? No, the Wonder Woman.
Oh, Gal Gadot.
Galga. Gal Gadot. Even her, she was like she let go. She let
Mhm.
go. Because
Yeah,
she's like, she's just like, I'm out of her. And it
yeah.
was like in the letting go is when we allow in.
So here's a good question for you. How do you do that? You're the coach.
How do you let go?
Yeah.
Change the subject. If I've got too much resistance going on about something, I need to change the subject because I
Why is
can't
that so
go.
hard for people?
What are we doing? To let go?
No, to
Because
change the subject.
well, one thing, we're working against law of attraction because we've already built momentum.
Ah,
And so law of attraction is our friend, but not when I'm doing myself a disfavor by keep talking about what I don't want or what I don't
right.
like. And then I just build up all this momentum and then I can't, it's hard to change the subject or it's hard to tell that better feeling story about that subject.
Yeah.
And so instead it's just, we had this conversation the other day where I called you and then I was telling you something, you're like, I've never heard of this part of the story. And you're like so cute because you're like, oh, the fountain. And I'm at the fountain. So I was confused, but you were referring to that was the best part of your job at that time was the fountain when I was coaching you. And we just talked about the fountain and you just told me how much you loved it. And so I went on to tell you about how much I love this other thing. And you're like, I never heard those words come out of your mouth. And then, oh, this is such a great story. So then we start talking about comedy and then we start laughing. So here we just have, I go on and on about this thing that I really love. And then we start talking about comedy and laughing and how good it feels to laugh.
Mhm.
And then about both of our experiences recently with comedy. And earlier that day, because I'm looking at getting another car, getting a new car, a newer car. And so it's like maybe a 2015, 26 Lexus ES, and I want a white one with silver polished trim. And I'm like, earlier that day, I'm like thinking, I never see them. I never
Mhm.
see them. How am I going to even, because I want to see what a 2015, 2016 even looks like. I'm like, I never see them. How am I going to buy one? I don't even see them on the road. And you and I are talking and we're having this amazing conversation. And as we end the call and I start to pull out of the parking spot, a white Lexus ES 350 turns in front of me and starts going down the driveway area. And I'm like, what? So I immediately pull out and I'm like following it. And I'm like looking at it. And I'm like, if he pulls over, I'm going to pull up right next to him and ask him, what year is that? And anyways, he never did. And I could tell it wasn't like a 15 or 16, but I just drove away. He turned right, I turned left. And I was like, Steph, earlier today you were saying you never see a white Lexus ES. And here's one. I go, what were you doing? You were laughing. You were talking about what you love and you were laughing with your friend and you were so in and near the vortex. And then this thing you were talking about earlier in the day that you never ever see floats right in front of you. And I'm like thinking, girl, one, they're there. You just don't know that they're there. And two, had I been complaining, had I been talking about something that I didn't like, I would not have seen that car drive by, or it would not have driven by.
So I think so that's a one episode kind of thing, which is super helpful. But I think one of the things that people struggle with, I know I definitely have, is that some of the things that we want to be, do, or have take stages or steps. And so the challenge is that even if you realize, like, oh, I'm focusing on not having this thing, so I need to, the easiest way is to change the subject entirely, like listen to a stand-up comedian or piece of music or whatever. They, quite often, we need to participate in a process of getting that thing.
Yeah.
And parts of the process can refocus us. Like,
Right.
and I'll just randomly pull an example, like I'm just making this up, but like if I wanted to get a new job and I was having, negative thoughts like, oh, I'll never get a job that I really like.
Yeah.
So I can go watch an hour of stand-up comedy, laugh my butt off, and that's
Yeah.
going to help bring the new job.
Yeah.
But then I might need to actually, like,
Of course.
let's just say, look at job listings or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes looking at the job listings will remind me
Yeah.
that I don't have that job. And so my brain will start thinking like, oh God, the
Right.
job I want isn't out there, or I'm not
Right.
qualified enough or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, is it just a continual process of like
It really
noticing,
is. It really
noticing and
is.
changing the subject, noticing and changing
Yeah.
the subject? Yeah.
Well, or if I'm noticing that I'm looking for a job and and then what are the thoughts? I think
Mm-hmm.
noticing because sometimes writing them down
Mm-hmm.
and then looking at, well, is that true? Do I know that to be true?
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's, oh, if one of the thoughts is, oh, I can't find a job that I like, they're not out there, write that down. And then I was like, well, is that really true? Like just kind of taking it apart. Because Abraham talks about the focus wheel is like putting something in the center and then try to just softening up what that difficult thing is. And I may not even have that right with the focus wheel, but just kind of softening that resistant place. And they talk about, or even I've done tapping where I'll come up with this thing, like, even though I don't believe that there's a job out there that I love and like for me, I completely love and accept myself. And then I just like start tapping through like all those things, like, yeah, I've never had one that I love. And how am I going to find it? It doesn't exist, blah, blah, just let it all out. Cause I have all these like negative emotions around it. And it kind of talking about like softening the resistance of like letting go is when I can like talk all that out and tap it out through my nervous system. I can get to this place of least resistance. So then it's like I can look for a job and it doesn't trigger me because I've kind of worked through those thoughts already.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another tool that I use personally and I use with clients.
We're out of time for this episode, but I think I want to do the next week's episode on this topic because I think we just like opened a big,
Yeah.
I don't know, file of ideas about that process. But I want to dig more into it. So tune in next week. But thank you so much for listening and watching. Listening and watching. Is that what I said?
Yeah.
Watching. To this week's episode. We hope you got something out of it today. Remember that at this time we are posting a brand new episode every Monday morning for you. We truly appreciate you doing whatever your platform allows you to do to support us. All our social media links and our email address are in the doodly doo down below on YouTube on that version. And we wish you a happy and abundant week. And we look forward to you joining us again on the next episode of Co-Creation Station. Bye, everybody.
Bye.